So I'm talking about thinking styles. The relevance being that we are often unaware of the way that we think, and we can feel really out of control of our thoughts. And of everything, our thoughts are the one thing that we can control. So that's not regards to the thoughts that come at us from our environment, from our upbringing, from the people that we are with most of the time. But it's just the thoughts that we choose to believe, the thoughts that we choose to take in and to kind of assign meaning to. That's our choice, and we have control over that. We can obviously disregard anything else that's unhelpful and unhealthy, negative, etc. So when we realize that we can control our thoughts, by doing that, of course, that filters down, that trickles down to being able to control our feelings, because our feelings come from our thoughts. And then once we control our thoughts and our feelings, that then controls our outcomes. Because our actions are based around the way that we're feeling. So if we feel sad, we will act in a way that kind of fits that emotional state. And if we feel happy, conversely, we will behave in a way that fits that state. So partway through working with clients, I will talk about and discuss their current or their previous thinking styles, their unhelpful thinking styles. And I often sort of say to them, where are you now? Because knowledge is power. So at the moment you're having these thoughts, you're having feelings based upon those thoughts, anxious, negative feelings, and you're kind of like, I don't know where this came from. But having the understanding, and knowledge is power there, about where these thoughts are structured, where they sit in a scale of sort of positive to negative, is really, really helpful. And although we've got the saying, ignorance is bliss, in this case, it really isn't. So being ignorant to the thoughts that we're having, in terms of just not knowing the nature of them and not thinking that we can control them, not realizing, what's influenced them, that isn't helpful. And actually the opposite is really helpful. Knowledge about what thoughts we're having can really, really help us. So empower yourself. So if you feel that you've got issues with anxiety or phobia or something that's really kind of governing your life, know that you can empower yourself to familiarize yourself, I guess, with the different unhelpful thinking styles, and really kind of see, well, which ones of those am I guilty of? Which do I do on a regular basis? And quite often people will realize that they will have a whole host of these. It tends not to be just one particular style. So going through them, the first one is sometimes called like having a mental filter, if you like. So sort of when you think about your thoughts, do you tend to sort of filter in and filter out aspects of a situation? Only taking notice, if you like, of one aspect or the negative aspect or parts, and kind of forget and ignore the rest, ignore the positives. So do you see things, if you like, through kind of gloomy or grumpy glasses when you filter? And just disregard all of the positives. The second one is sort of prediction, sort of thinking you've got that crystal ball, that sort of mystic Meg tendency. So do you often believe that you know what's going to happen, and you say to yourself, I know that if I do this, this will happen, or I know if I don't do this, this will happen, or I bet, I'm certain. And you're kind of predicting the future, and then you're focusing on that negative outcome that you predicted, and then you're almost trying to prove that you were right all along. And in some cases, when we predict, that outcome may eventualize, but of course it may not, and often it doesn't. Most often it doesn't. There are a whole myriad of other options that actually are more likely. Linking in with that is sort of mind reading. And there is the sort of saying, assuming, if you assume, you make an ass out of you and me. And this is along the lines of, do you assume what others are thinking? You're usually typically about you, what opinions they're forming, what reactions they're having. And are those assumptions typically, negative and unkind in nature? Then a big one is often catastrophizing. So do you imagine, whenever you're in a given scenario, do you imagine and believe that the absolute worst possible outcome will happen, rather than looking actually at what's most likely? So even allowing yourself to think, well, you know, on a scale, it could be this, and this, but do you just naturally divert and go straight towards the most catastrophic, the most fearful of the outcomes, as opposed to even acknowledging the others that could be possible? And then linking in, I guess, to that to an extent is black and white thinking. So do you tend to believe that something or someone can only be good or bad? So that there's no grey area, those middle points. Something is either right or it's wrong, it's good or it's bad. You know, you have to do it or you don't do it. There's no kind of option to consider a grey area being compromise, alternatives, a combination of doing something and not doing it, i.e. so maybe you might do it but there's a time scale behind it, or you might do it to a lesser degree, or etc. etc. So do you tend to have that real kind of polar opposite in terms of your thinking? This next one is a really damaging, I guess, type of thinking, because it's to do with how we speak to ourselves, so how we talk about ourselves in our mind. It's the critical negative self-talk. And when I say about it being most damaging, I'm kind of coming at it from a viewpoint of the fact that we are with ourselves 24/7. Whether we are with others or not, we are always with ourselves in all of those scenarios, from the moment we wake up throughout, you know, sleep time, dreaming, etc. 24/7 we're with ourselves. So do you tend to put yourself down? Do you tend to blame yourself, criticize yourself for personal aspects, for events, outcomes, situations that, you know, whether they're your responsibility or not? And are you just simply kind of unkind to yourself in the nature of how you speak of yourself to you, to others, how you reference yourself? You know, are you saying things like, oh God, you're such an idiot, you're so clumsy, you're so stupid, just typical you doing that again, you know, you always forget. Is that the nature of your self-talk? Is it very sort of self-deprecating and negative? Then there's emotional reasoning. And this is like, do you tend to base views of situations and views of yourself dependent on the way you're feeling about it in that moment? So perhaps the only evidence that you have that something is bad and that something bad's going to happen is that you feel as though something's bad is going to happen. So you go, well, I feel something bad's going to happen, therefore it is. So you're basing the situation and giving reason to that feeling based on the current feeling that you're experiencing, rather than looking at the situation separately. Judgments and being judgmental is another really unhelpful thinking style. So do you find yourself making evaluations, judgments about events, about yourself or the world in general, rather than describing what you actually did see, what you actually did experience, or what you've actually got evidence for? So are you just sort of basing it on a very sort of broad brushstroke judgment, as opposed to really honing in and going, well, I'm saying that, but where's my evidence? You know, where did I actually see? What did I actually see? What did I actually experience? I'm just going to sort of tarnish it and make a judgment with a very sort of broad brush. Moving on to a sort of combination of comparing and despairing, and magnification and sort of minimization. So comparing and despairing, do you have a tendency to compare yourself to other people? And in doing that, you filter, so the mental filter coming in here again, but you only hone in on other people's positives. So almost putting them on a pedestal and then comparing yourself negatively to those heightened perceptions. And then alongside that, do you have a tendency as well to kind of magnify other people's successes, anything positive that you perceive someone else to, any attributes you perceive them to have? Do you kind of enlarge them, hence the magnification, and downplay any negatives that they have? So you're making the gap between their positives and their negatives bigger, whilst also minimizing your own positive aspects. So your qualities, do you kind of downplay those, and do you magnify your negatives? So you're creating a much bigger contrasting gap between yourself and others. Mountains and molehills, do you literally tend to exaggerate the risk of danger? Do you exaggerate the negatives? So there is an element of something being potentially negative and dangerous, but you absolutely turn that into a mountain. Or do you also tend to sort of minimize the odds of how likely a positive outcome is going to be? So you make the positives into molehills and you make the negatives into mountains. And again, you're making this wider contrast as well when you're doing that. Another unhelpful thinking style is labeling. Like, do you tend to label yourself? Do you tend to label others by making like a global statement based on behavior in specific situations? And do you then use that label even when there are so many other examples that aren't consistent with that belief? So you might label, say, a behavior or a reaction, such as, say, a stomach sensation. And with emetophobia that I tend to work with, you kind of add the label, oh, that's the emetophobia, that's nausea, and you go towards adding a label to that, when in fact there could be so many other reasons. It could be thirst, it could be hunger, it could be gas, it could be overeating, it could be excitement, it could be nerves. So there's a whole host of things that it could be, but you've got that label, you've attached that label to yourself in that case of, I'm an emetophobe, and every time I have a sensation with my stomach, it is this. We can label ourselves in terms of a behavior, I'm clumsy. And therefore anything to do with dropping something or something getting broken, or, the nature of how you do something or pick something up or function, your label is, well, I'm clumsy, I'm a klutz, I'm ditzy, I'm all this. And do you assign that label? Then there's sort of overgeneralization. So do you over exaggerate by, say, taking one event from the past or the present and then imposing it on all current and future situations? So do you find yourself saying things like, oh, you always do that, you always forget, you always make an idiot of yourself, you always, or I never, I'm never going to be able to do it, I can never do this, I can't, and just generalize based on perhaps one event where that potentially had some truth to it, but you then apply it, and as I say, overgeneralize from there. Anything that remotely seems like or replicates that event, you then assign that same perception to it. And then sort of finishing with should, should and must. Are you always saying, I should do this, I must do that? Do you use those phrases often, those prefixes? And obviously occasionally this can be helpful. If it was a habit you were trying to break, like how many spoonfuls of sugar you have in your tea, for example, then by saying, well, I really should just cut down to one. Okay, that could be quite helpful. But if you're saying just generally, I really should stop doing this, I really should do this, or I really must, it can put a lot of sort of unreasonable demands and additional pressure on yourself and make you kind of feel that sense of pressure. And then, of course, if you don't perhaps fulfill something for whatever reason, you then can go down the avenue of shame, blame, and guilt for not having done it because of the pressure that you put on, rather than, again, because of other thinking styles, not looking at the other options of, it was an unrealistic target in the first place, I ran out of time. Actually, I changed my mind and I have decided, I've come up with something better, and that's why I've done it. So you've got that element to it. So instead of the should and must, sort of picking something else that you could say instead. So like maybe I can, or I'm choosing to, because it just flips from being a kind of pressurized, possibly negative connotation to a more positive one. So having covered those styles, it's like, okay, right, now I've got the information, knowledge is power. Now what do I do? How do I break the cycle? And so once you've kind of identified, so step one is sort of looking at those and go, okay, which of those do I have a tendency to do quite often? Which are my real go-to negative thinking styles? And so once you've done that, you're in a great place to take back control. And with regards to control, which is often behind, anxiety and phobias and things like that, the need to feel in control because at some point we felt that we don't have it or that we've lost it. It's really key to kind of remember here that you control your thoughts. Your thoughts don't control you. And most of your thoughts are not true. And a lot of our thoughts aren't even our own. But really out of those, it's knowing that you control your thoughts. They're the one thing that we do control. And going back to the fact that there may be thoughts that come into your minds and they're not helpful, they're not wanted, they're not true. And it's not about trying to control those. It's not about trying to stop those thoughts that come from the environment, that come from experience, that come from the past, that come from influences. It's just about controlling which ones you let in, because it's only the thoughts that we let in that generate any power and that have any effect upon us. Once we assign meaning and belief to them, once we believe them to be true, that's when we assign the power to them. So if we just have the thought and reject it, ignore it, bat it away, it doesn't have an impact upon us. It's only when we believe it to be true and sort of take it in. So knowing that you control your thoughts and knowing your thinking styles, the next step is to say, okay, now I'm going to move forward and I'm going to make changes. And so catch it, check it, change it is something people talk about with regards to their thinking. So begin with catch yourself as you have that unhelpful thought, and then empower yourself by simply knowing what you're doing and when you're doing it. So catch yourself in the act, if you like, of having that unhelpful thinking style. And of course, when you transition and try and change behaviors, there is that transition period of still doing what you did for a period of time, but bringing in the new habits and behaviors. And then obviously you want to transition so that the old behaviors are gone and the new ones obviously take over. But that first step is just catching it. Catch yourself in the act. It's like, like right now I'm catastrophizing, so I'm going to, I can, and sort of looking at it from a different viewpoint. And then the check it element is like, check the thought in relation to its nature. Is it helpful? So you've stopped and caught the thought, and then you're empowering yourself by saying, right, okay, is it helpful? Do I want this one? Is this thought going to take me towards my goal or further away from it? Is it going to take me towards happiness and positive change, or is it going to keep me stuck in the status quo? And, also you can, with the check it, is like, how realistic is this thought? How likely is this thought? So not only the nature of it, but also what's the probability of the outcome that is attached to that thought? How likely is that? And then the final bit, the change it, is quite obviously change it. So change it for a better one. So if you're having a thought and you identify it to be unwanted, unhelpful, negative, unrealistic, unlikely, It's okay, well, I'm going to change it for another one. I'm going to flip it to a polar opposite that actually is one that I want to be having, one that will take me towards my desired path and away from what I've been experiencing. And a sort of tip here is kind of fake it till you make it. So sometimes when we've been having a series or a particular thinking style for such a long time, because it becomes ingrained, it becomes habitual, which is why the first aspect of even knowing we're doing it is really good, because it kind of disturbs that cycle. But when something is very, very familiar and we've been doing it for so long, when we try to initially give ourselves another thought that is so different in nature, it can feel like, well, that's a lie, that's untrue, that's not real, that's not it's not true. So if you think of something to do with ourself, for example, so going back to that critical self-talk, it might be that we often say, oh, you're such an idiot, or you might look in the mirror and go, you're such an ugly cow. It's something really negative, and we're saying that constantly to us. When you look at that statement, when you look at that thought, it's a lie anyway. Okay, ugly, that's subjective. Okay, so what one person finds attractive, another one doesn't, and vice versa. And nothing is ugly. There are just different perceptions as to the scale of beauty and what we take from things. So ugly is a lie in terms of looking at ourselves. And then if we've called ourselves an ugly cow, we're a human being. So that there is a lie as well. So that entire statement is a lie anyway. But not only that, because we're letting it in, it's having an effect on the way we feel about ourselves, our confidence, self-esteem, etc. And then it's obviously taking us in a particular direction. So initially, the opposite of that, if you go to the far extreme, could be to, right, I'm going to tell myself I'm an absolute goddess. I'm gorgeous, I'm stunning. And because of the nature of that contrast, they really are sort of polar opposites, it can feel really like, that I don't feel that. That feels like a lie. But then, reminder, we were lying anyway. We were lying anyway, and it was taking us on a path that we weren't enjoying, that we weren't liking, that we weren't wanting. So why not just tell ourselves a different lie, a better lie, a more positive lie in the interim, if that makes us feel better, less negative, it makes us feel positive and happy and helps to build on that confidence. So knowing that the majority of our thoughts are lies anyway, or a lot of them are, when we come across one and we want to flip it, but we perhaps feel a little bit uncomfortable initially, why not just tell ourselves a better lie? So fake it till you make it in that instance. And then the more we tell ourselves things of a positive nature, the more that becomes our reality, because we do start to feel that, we do feel more confident, we do feel more worthy, our self-esteem builds, etc., etc. So then actually it stops becoming a lie. We might adapt it, we might tweak it, we might say, oh, actually, I don't know about goddess, but I'm going to tell myself I'm gorgeous. I'm okay with gorgeous. That feels good. That feels comfortable. And then that becomes our reality. We look in the mirror and we do feel gorgeous. So one of the key ways leading on from that the mind, the ways in which the mind works, is that it's really helpful to know that the mind doesn't kind of question. It's quite simplistic in one regard, in as what we tell it, what we allow to come in, those thoughts that we sort of give a stamp of approval to, if you like, and take them in. The mind doesn't care. It doesn't question whether the things that we allow in are true, untrue, helpful, unhelpful, kind, unkind, right, wrong, healthy, unhealthy, good, bad, etc. It just lets them in. It goes, okay, it's a bit like a bouncer. If you've got a ticket, your name's on the list, you can come in. I'm not going to question who you are, but your name's on the list so you can come in. And the mind does that, just it lets those thoughts in. So knowing that, again, that feeds into the fact that you can sort of shape those thoughts in a way that is going to get you towards your desired outcome and take you away from what you've been experiencing. So sort of examples to help going forward. So if you take the mental filter thinking style, if you focus on all the negative aspects and have like a habit of dismissing the positives in a situation or in a scenario, start by catching yourself doing it. So this is what I'm doing now. I'm using that filter. I'm using my sort of grumpy glasses or gloomy glasses, or however you want to think of it. And I'm filtering out all the good stuff, and I'm only sort of seeing the bad. And then the catch it, check it, change it. So you've caught yourself doing it. You've called it out for what it is. It's that filtering. And then you check. It's like, in what way am I filtering? How am I filtering? It's like, am I filtering out the positives? Is that what I'm doing here? Am I, as I say, wearing those glasses? Am I only noticing and focusing on the bad? Is that how I'm filtering? So I'm letting in all the bad, ignoring the good, or am I just ignoring, the good and the bad? Or what am I doing? Just kind of get a sort of an outlook on exactly how you're filtering once you've caught yourself doing it. And then, of course, the last bit to change it is change the outlook to a more helpful one, to a positive one, by looking for positives that you had dismissed previously, that you had filtered, that you'd ignored, and bring those to the fore, bring those to your attention, focus on them, shine a spotlight on them, because what we focus on, we get more of. It's another rule of the mind. So when we focus on the negative, we see more negative. When we focus on the positive, guess what? We see more positive. And like a day-to-day example of that is when perhaps you're thinking about buying a new car and you narrow it down. And up until that point, cars have been all around you, different cars, colors, makes, models, whatever. But then when you narrow it down and you think, actually, I'm going to buy a Mini, and then you go and buy a Mini. Once you're a Mini owner, it then kind of appears that every other car on the road seems to be a Mini. It's in your awareness. You're looking for it because it's on your radar, so to speak. And of course, when we look for it, we tend to find it. There are no more Minis on the road driving around, logically, the day after you become a Mini owner than there were the day before. But it's just that shift in your awareness has brought it to your attention. And it's very much the same with your thoughts. So if you know you're filtering and you know you tend to block out the positives and let all the negatives in, then once you know it, you can check what you're doing and go, okay, I'm choosing to change it, and I'm going to focus on a positive. I'm going to start with one positive that I kind of left in the corner or just played it down, and I'm actually going to magnify that. Again, talking about the magnification, and we can bring in and do the opposing things for all of these helpings, these unhelpful thinking styles, and we can turn them in our favor. Prediction and catastrophizing. So an example, if you find yourself doing that a lot. So if you have a tendency to try and predict the future, be a bit of a mystic Meg, try and predict the outcome, what others are going to do, what you think the future will hold. And again, catch yourself doing that and call it out for what it is and say, look, I think I'm being a bit of a mystic Meg here. That's what I'm doing right now. Or I'm being mystic Meg and I'm thinking of worst case scenario. I've gone straight to that worst case. So you've called it out, you've caught it, you've done the catch it part, and then check like the likeliness of that prediction coming true, that catastrophic eventuality coming true. So how likely is it that actually might happen? Am I imagining the worst thing possible here? Thinking the worst will happen is not helpful right now. And what is something, so this is the change, to focus on that's more positive? That's actually also far more likely to happen. So just seeking out those positives, calling out what you're doing, looking at how likely it is, and choosing to focus on something that's actually far more likely and less catastrophic than the one that you naturally kind of went to. And then the should and must. So again, if you're always adding that extra pressure, I should do this, I must do this, do you find yourself saying need? And again, call yourself out, say, I'm doing that pressure thing again. I'm putting should and must into this. So catch yourself doing it. You know, I'm adding more pressure again, and I'm going to check just how valid this need that I feel there is. How valid is that need? So do I need to actually do this thing? So perhaps it's a safety behavior, and you're calling it out for what it is and the nature of it and the nature of those thoughts. It's like, well, do I actually need to do this? Can I instead do something else, you know, with less pressure and a better, more helpful outcome? And then the last bit, can I change the should or the must to actually, instead of adding pressure and making me feel suppressed in some way, can I use something and view it to empower myself, to feel empowered, and that I've got this sense of choice? You know, could I use different wording? So I'm choosing to do this, or I'm choosing not to because, but there's a valid reason for those choices. And you can add to that, you know, I'm choosing to do this because I want to create, you know, a different outcome. I want to create a more positive outcome for me. So kind of in summary, I guess, from all of that, you know, just a takeaway from this would be, you know, you choose knowledge. And the knowledge is power, which we began with. You control your thoughts don't control you. And choose to think and believe only the thoughts that you want to think, that are helpful, that are positive, that are going to take you towards your desired outcome and not further away from it. So you choose knowledge. Again, repeating, the knowledge is power. You control your thoughts, they don't control you. And you choose to believe and think the things that are going to take you towards your goals and not further away from them. So if you've got any questions about this, just drop me a message, get in touch, because this is just a part of the process that I use when I work with clients. And it really is instrumental in making those changes and taking you towards the feelings and the existence, the life that you want to be living, and obviously puts things, unwanted things, feelings, emotions in the past.